So we look at your gut, we look at your minerals, we look at your detoxification, we look at your nervous system. And then, of course, I refer out for certain things. So with acne, like having a topical skincare routine that is acne specific is really important. So I'll refer out to acne certified estheticians because we want to treat the internal and the external. And then for some clients, it is really helpful to see a therapist when we're also working on the root causes if there's like trauma involved or, life stressors that are happening that need to be navigated. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of She's in Sync. Today, I'm going to be sharing the top 3 mistakes I made when stopping birth control. And I'm sharing this because I want you to avoid the same mistakes I made and that a lot of women make because we just aren't educated and told another way. So let's get into it. The first mistake I made when stopping birth control was I stopped without any prep work. So just a backstory, I had been on birth control for 10 years. I was originally put on it at 18 years old because I had a missing period. And I was told by my doctor, you're good, just stay on it till you want to come off and get pregnant. You're going away to college, assumed that I'd be sexually active. I was not. And basically was just set on my way. There was no deeper digging or exploring of like what the root causes of my missing period were. And so what was actually happening was I was struggling with an undiagnosed eating disorder. I was under eating. I was over exercising. I was like, go, just running on cortisol. And that's when my period went away because my body was like, you're not safe enough to, even though I didn't want this at the time, to house a baby. And so my hormones just shut down. And so instead of addressing the root cause, AKA not eating enough, over exercising, stress, I was put on birth control to give a fake period. And you're not having a real period on birth control, as a review if you're new to this podcast, because you are not ovulating. So it induces an artificial bleed, not actually a true period. So when I found that out, I was like, what the heck? Here I am at 27 years old. I'd been on birth control for almost a year. Maybe I was 28 at that point, for almost 10 years. And I didn't know that I wasn't actually having a true period. So I made the decision to stop birth control. So mistake number 1 was I just quit without any prep work because I didn't know any different, right? Like I went to my doctor and asked, I was like, I want to stop birth control. I don't want to be on artificial hormones anymore. And she basically was like, okay, we'll just stop and see what happens. And for the next 4 years, I dealt with hormonal hell, AKA post-birth control syndrome. I had really deep, painful cystic acne all along my chin, mustache line, and jaw. No matter what I tried, it wouldn't go away. I had really bad anxiety, like really intrusive thoughts, trouble sleeping, and my period came back, but I later found out I wasn't ovulating. So you can actually bleed without ovulating, and just like you do on birth control, or you can ovulate without bleeding. So it's really interesting. So that's where testing can be really helpful to figure out like what's going on. But even as a dietitian with a master's degree, I was like, what the heck is happening? And, that was my number 1 mistake is I didn't prep my body ahead of time because birth control masks the deeper issues. And so even though I had worked on healing my relationship with food, eating more, nourishing myself better, not over-exercising, working on stress, the deeper root causes, of my acne and of my anxiety were not addressed. And birth control it does have side effects, no matter what your doctor tells you. Like if you open up the pamphlet of your birth control pack or read through the paperwork before you get your IUD inserted or your shot, it has a list of side effects. We're just not informed about that. Any medication has side effects. So I'm not against birth control. I just think that we need to be more informed as women versus just giving it out as like, well, this is your only option. You have painful, heavy periods, you have a missing period, you have acne, you have anxiety on this birth control, let's try a different one. It's not as simple as that. And so when you want to stop, you want to work on preparing your body ahead of time. And if you haven't checked out my free Breakup with Birth Control Masterclass, I walk you through my 4-step framework that I use with my clients to safely prep them to come off birth control. That has helped dozens and dozens of women stop birth control without side effects or very minimal side effects. So you don't have to go through that 4 years of, hormonal hell. And one thing I will say is that just waiting it out for your hormones to balance will not fix things. So if you stop birth control and you're like, oh shoot, I did not prep my body ahead of time, that makes sense why I'm having these symptoms. A lot of times if you go on Facebook groups or, you talk to your doctor or, go on Reddit, they'll be like, oh, we'll just wait 6 months for your hormones to level out. Like that's how long it takes for the hormones to get out of your system and your hormones come back online. I don't know. I don't agree with that because for most people that's not true. So again, I dealt with post-birth control syndrome. I dealt with all those symptoms for 4 years because I didn't address the root causes of them. Just waiting it out did not work for me, and it doesn't work for a lot of women. So if you're in the same boat, that's where, functional testing to ID what the root causes are contributing to your symptoms are so helpful. But the analogy I like to use is if you stop birth control without prepping, it's like running a marathon without training first. So like you could sign up for a marathon tomorrow and like run it, but it's not going to be a good experience most likely because you haven't been training. You haven't been fueling your body for it. You haven't been, working the muscles that you need to have a good experience. You're not mentally ready for it. You're not there. And so you could do it, but you'll probably really struggle with it. And it's not going to be an enjoyable experience versus if you adequately prepare your body ahead of time, it's going to be a much smoother, more enjoyable process. Mistake number 2 that I made was treating my symptoms in isolation. So like I said, my big symptoms were I had an anovulatory period, anxiety, and the painful cystic acne. So I treated every single symptom individually because, again, I didn't know better. So I went to a dermatologist for my acne. I went to my doctor for anxiety and a therapist for anxiety. So I got put on medication and I started seeing a therapist. And then my period, I was able to figure that out on my own. That was pretty simple for me as a dietitian. But the other 2 things I had no clue because I didn't know any of the stuff I know now about root causes to acne and mood stuff. So those things weren't working. No matter what skincare product I tried, I did antibiotics, I did spironolactone, I did tretinoin, I did facials, I did chemical peels, I did light therapy, I did all these things and restrictive diets, and none of it worked. And at one point, my dermatologist was like, you're just going to have to go back on birth control or Accutane. They gave me those 2 options. And I was like, no and no. Like, I know at this point, like, this is my body screaming for help. You obviously aren't educated to help me in this way. So I'm going to figure this out on my own. And that's where I pursued functional nutrition training, specifically for hormone healing and for skin health. And that's where I learned all that I do now and healed my own skin and my anxiety and my periods. But that is what I did for my skin. And then for anxiety therapy, I don't want to say it wasn't helpful at the time. I think it was helpful, but I just don't think it was the right fit. And I don't think that it truly resolved my issue because it was something deeper. And I have a whole podcast about the root causes to anxiety and how birth control literally impacts your brain and changes your brain chemistry. So if you haven't checked that out, make sure you check that out. So no matter, if you're not getting to the root of it, talk therapy isn't going to solve that because if you still have those physiological things, like I had higher copper, I had sluggish detox pathways that were making it difficult to eliminate that copper. I had really depleted minerals, which was decreasing my resiliency to stress. So I felt stressed more deeply. Those things need to be addressed to help with, that in combination with therapy would have been helpful, but just working on therapy or just doing anxiety medication, it wasn't really moving the needle for me. So I was going to all these different people trying to, fix these individual root causes or fix these individual symptoms rather without a root cause approach. And no one was trained to look at the whole piece. And that's exactly what I do with my clients is we look at all the body systems. So we look at your gut, we look at your minerals, we look at your detoxification, we look at your nervous system. And then, of course, I refer out for certain things. So with acne, like having a topical skincare routine that is acne specific is really important. So refer out to acne certified estheticians because we want to treat the internal and the external. And then for some clients, it is really helpful to see a therapist when we're also working on the root causes if there's like trauma involved or, life stressors that are happening that need to be navigated. But those were the things we want to do them in combination. And we want to look at how all the body systems are interconnected because it's usually not just one root cause. It's multiple different things. And you don't want to just treat the symptom. You don't want to just treat the acne or the anxiety. in the traditional conventional way, we want to treat the root cause of like what is deeper, what is happening inside that's leading to the acne, the anxiety, the missing or painful period. Okay. So that was number 2. I was treating each symptom in isolation versus taking a whole body approach. And I also want to preface here, hopefully this is implied, but I'm saying all this because I made all these mistakes, right? Like this episode is literally called like the 3 biggest mistakes I made when coming off birth control as a dietitian. So I was a dietitian who had a master's degree in nutrition at the time of me stopping birth control. I didn't have all the functional training I do now, of course, but I was really smart back then and I knew about health. And so if you're struggling with these things, or if you're listening and you're like, wow, I didn't do any of that, that is not your fault. That was not my fault. That is not your fault. This is from a lack of education and understanding. And this goes back to like health education class, right? Like we aren't taught that we have different phases in our cycle. We aren't taught that we're not having a real period on birth control. We weren't taught that there are deeper imbalances underneath the surface that need to be explored. We're oftentimes just given birth control, or we're given like your labs look normal or everything's fine. That's just part of being a woman. But that's a cop-out, that's an excuse, and that women deserve better. We deserve better, and we deserve this education, which is why I'm sharing this. So don't feel down on yourself if you didn't know this. This is exactly why I'm recording this episode. And then number 3 is I ran the wrong labs and I focused on the wrong things. So when I stopped birth control, my most distressing symptom was my acne because it was on my face. It was painful. It was embarrassing. I was in my late 20s into my 30s struggling with acne. And it just wouldn't go away. And I was like, what the heck am I doing wrong? I was doing everything right? Like, I'm sure you can relate to that. I was doing everything right. And I jumped straight to hormone testing because I was like, okay, I just came off birth control. My hormones are obviously imbalanced. Based on where my acne was, it was my chin and my jaw. And so everything you see online, they're like, well, that's hormonal. So of course it made sense to test my hormones, right? So I did hormone testing and it didn't really tell me much. Like overall, my hormone levels were pretty good. I didn't have a 5A, androgen preference for my skin. So it wasn't hormonal. My estrogen was fine. My progesterone was fine. Like I had some cortisol issues, but like obviously, so it didn't really give me a whole lot. And it's an expensive test. I did the Dutch test. And so I learned from that you got to go deeper. Okay. And so this is why I very rarely test hormones on my clients, because usually it gives us more questions than it does answers. And it's not giving us any information that is helpful. And this is also why some functional providers, if you do hormone testing with them, they just give you a long list of supplements, but we're not addressing the deeper underlying issues like depleted minerals, like gut imbalances, like high copper or heavy metals, okay? The things that are imbalancing hormones to begin with. So today, now I focus on, I say hormones are the tip of the iceberg. That's what's showing, but we need to dig deeper of like what's underneath the iceberg, what's really causing those symptoms to begin with, okay? And that's why I do the functional testing that I do with my clients, the HTMA, the gut testing, the functional blood labs, the iodine testing, all of those things, because we're not going to get to the underlying root causes. It's kind of like blaming the fire alarm versus the actual fire if we're not addressing those things first. So unless you run those labs, it's a waste of time, energy, and money to run your hormone testing. So those are the 3 biggest mistakes I made. Not prepping beforehand. And if you're new here, I recommend prepping for at least 3 to 4 months, ideally. Any prep is good prep. And I recommend running functional labs to uncover the root causes of your symptoms so you can address those before coming off, so you have a smooth transition off. This is, again, where my root cause or where my Break Up with Birth Control masterclass is really helpful. If you haven't downloaded that, that's the link in the show notes is there. Absolutely free. Just really, really helpful. I have some case studies in there too of what I've done with clients, what their labs have said, and my 4-step framework. Number 2 is I treated the symptoms in isolation. And number 3, I ran the wrong labs and I was focusing solely on hormones as the issue when it was really much deeper. So instead, I obviously for 4 years, those things weren't working. And so I ended up looking into and learning about functional nutrition and getting to the root cause. And I was my own first case study, my own first client, where I ran all the labs I run on clients on myself. I put myself through personalized healing protocols. And, over the course of a year and a half, I was able to clear my skin, calm my mood. I had a healthy ovulatory cycle, which a year and a half seems like a lot. But when you've suffered with this for 4 years, and, I had technically not had a period for 10 plus years, and I had acne that was on again, off again. Birth control kind of helped it, but not really. And I always had pretty high anxiety. It's like it was more than 4 years. That was just when it was at its peak, but it was pretty much my whole life. A year and a half of that kind of freedom and those answers and feeling better, like to get to that point is a drop in the bucket. So, this is exactly why I created my free Breakup with Birth Control masterclass. So you can dive even deeper into all of these things, like I mentioned. So if you haven't checked that out, please do. It's going to be so helpful for you, or send it to a friend. And hopefully this episode helps you avoid these same mistakes so you can have a smooth, easy breezy, beautiful transition off of birth control. So if you know someone else who needs to hear this episode, please send it their way. And until next time, stay nourished, friends.